10 Symbols of Nothing. A reading review contributed by Andy Russell on March 30, 2023. Last Saturday, about 5 of us read the beginning of Sermon 19 from the complete mystical works of Meister Eckhart. Even though the sermon is only 5 pages long, we weren't able to finish it within our hour-and-a-half meeting. Our discussion eclipsed our reading time because this is a particularly evocative sermon. I find that it is difficult to reflect on the writings of mystics like Meister Eckhart because every sentence appears to be a symbol of the great ineffable mystery. Here are 10 examples, with some 2-sentence exceptions, that were prominent in our discussion. 1. God is not a growing light, yet one must have got to him by growing. 2. Whatever is not the first light is all darkness and night. 3. When God takes form in the soul and infuses it, if you then take him as a light or a being or as goodness, if you recognize anything of him, that is not God. 4. God is a nothing and God is a something. 5. The light that God is shines in the darkness. 6. When the soul is unified and there enters into total self-abnegation, then she finds God as in nothing. 7. Whatever my soul perceives from without, an alien element enters in. 8. If we do see God in this light, it must be quite private and indrawn, without the intrusion of anything created. Then we have an immediate knowledge of eternal life. 9. The light that is God flows out and darkens every light. 10. In seeing nothing, he saw the divine nothing. It is an injustice to extract from Eckhart's work as if it were a mere quote mine. He develops several metaphors that are woven together to produce a conceptual depth that towers above individual statements. On the other hand, despite the apparent complexity and sophistication of his writings, I am impressed with the uncanny feeling, after reading Eckhart for several months now every Saturday with this group, that Eckhart is ultimately speaking of one thing over and over again in different ways. What may this one thing be? A queer type of reason compels me to conclude that it is the divine nothing that is also a something. If it is given that Eckhart was a mystic, as we believe him to be, and this designation means that he had contact with nothing God in the ground of the soul, then his writings must reflect this nothing. Perhaps when nothing enters the realm of somethings it becomes many things, like how a principle of natural science may be active in diverse phenomena. Principles and metaphysical objects like numbers seem to belong to this strange class of objects that are both something and nothing, which has the following relationship with the world of multiplicity: the nothings are represented in many separate somethings. Regardless if you agree with this line of thought, one must admit that the mysterious relationship between being and nothing is very interesting. Stepping away from speculation, I will now reflect on the mind quotations above as an exercise. The purpose of these reading reviews is to deeply engage with our readings by writing about them. So, let's see what I can make of these 10 symbols of nothing. Symbol 1. God is not a growing light, yet one must have got to him by growing. Eckhart does not seem to see God in the world at all. In fact, he routinely says that created things, or creatures, translated from the German Kreatur, there has been some debate among us about the meaning of this term, are lowercase nothing. He tells us that if we are to obtain God's light, we must retreat from the darkness that is the world of creation and enter the ground of the soul, which is essentially uncreated and equivalent to God's own essence. God is not a growing light because his light is not present in the world of creation. This notion comports with principles that are stereotypically Eastern, namely, that the external world is an illusion, the truth is within, and the man of truth is ultimately one who rejects the world of illusions. The growing Eckhart speaks of here seems to mean spiritual development, which consists of purifying oneself of alien images, thereby becoming a virgin wife who gives birth to God in the ground of the soul. Until this birth of the light occurs in the ground of the soul, we remain in utter darkness. This interpretation is likely to displease those who believe God's light guides their way through life. It seems to imply that unless one reaches the state Eckhart speaks of, which may be called mystical transcendence, one is as far from God, as benighted, as the most reprobate persons. A most disturbing corollary, given that this state is undoubtedly rare or extraordinarily difficult to achieve, the vast majority of humanity is condemned to a life of darkness, no matter how many good works they do or how moral they are. Symbol 2. Whatever is not the first light is all darkness and night. The first light is God, which may be likened to uncreated essence, i.e., the stuff the ground of the soul is made of. As we can see, if you understand symbol 1, this statement is trivial. God, i.e., uncreated essence, is the light in the world, i.e., creatures, is darkness and night. Naturally, we must ask, where is the first light? Is it lost in some faraway initial condition of the universe? This passage from Sermon 1 may help us answer these questions. Quote, "Here, in time, we are celebrating the eternal birth which God the Father bore and bears unceasingly in eternity, because this same birth is now born in time, in human nature, we shall therefore speak of this birth, of how it may take place in us and be consummated in the virtuous soul, whenever God the Father speaks his eternal word in the perfect soul. End quote. The first light, i.e., the eternal birth, is not an extinguished flame, but one God bears unceasingly in eternity. To obtain, or be this light, we must purify ourselves so that God may speak his eternal word in our perfected souls. The birth is forever happening in the eternal now, but our imperfection bars us from entering into divine procreation, leaving us to suffer the wages of sin in the long night of the created world. As the pagan master Socrates says in Plato's Phaedo, quote, "In this present life, I reckon that we make the nearest approach to knowledge when we have the least possible concern or interest in the body, and are not saturated with the bodily nature, but remain pure until the hour when God himself is pleased to release us. And then the foolishness of the body will be cleared away and we shall be pure and hold converse with other pure souls, and know of ourselves the clear light everywhere, and this is surely the light of truth. For no impure thing is allowed to approach the pure." End quote. Symbol 3. When God takes form in the soul and infuses it, if you then take him as a light or a being or as goodness, if you recognize anything of him, that is not God. I believe Eckhart is here referring to divine inspiration and similar phenomena like visions of God. If we remind ourselves of Eckhart's attitude towards images, or anything temporal for that matter, the meaning of this statement is quite clear. God is formless, uncreated, essence, therefore, when he takes form, appears as a creature or anything that can be appreciated by the powers of the soul, that phenomenon cannot be God by definition. These manifestations are the shadow of God, not the noumenon of God. Symbol 4. God is a nothing and God is a something. Carl Jung once wrote that paradoxes are among our most valuable spiritual possessions. We happen to be dealing with one of these now. Do you feel enriched by it? All paradoxes are logically equivalent. The paradox we are dealing with now is logically equivalent to the light is on and off. Paradoxes refer to non-existent states of a logical world. A light being on implies that it is not off, a thing being something implies that it is not nothing. We can mechanically generate paradoxes by violating these kinds of implications, which translates to unconstructible illogical states. Why then are such paradoxes considered to be so valuable? If we take paradoxes seriously, i.e., believe that they must be true, then they imply that something is wrong with our logical encoding of the objects addressed by our language. It seems to me, and I hope you understand that I am speaking as a fellow student, that logical paradoxes of the spiritual kind suggest that our logical model of the world is wrong. All spiritual paradoxes, like above, say one thing: reality is beyond our comprehension, i.e., the noumenon God cannot be grasped by the categories of thought, the powers of the soul. Either we change the logical meaning of our terms or we settle for the fact that this kind of symbol belongs to a spiritual language that is not subject to the logic of our mundane language. Or perhaps I've missed the point, that's always a possibility. See symbol 10 for a better interpretation. Symbol 5. The light that God is shines in the darkness. This is yet another paradox, but I believe I can make more of this one than the previous one. First, I should explain why I think it's a paradox. How can a light shine in the darkness? If a light is shining in a dark room, how can that room continue to be dark? This cannot be. Darkness yields to the presence of light. God would be a terribly poor light if where he shined remained dark. As I explained above, this statement exhibits the hallmarks of a paradox by representing an unconstructible illogical state in our logical model of the world. It truly is a symbol of nothing nonsense, which might as well be a synonym for paradox. From symbol 2 we may conclude that Eckhart does not envision God's light radiating out into the dark world. The world remains dark because God's light is contained in himself and in the perfect soul. God's light does not venture into the world, it shines in the darkness. The impure cannot approach the pure and the darkness cannot comprehend the light. A quote from John 1:5. "And the light shineth in darkness, and the darkness comprehended it not." End quote. The light of God is not a symbol of hope for the world. Only God in himself is light, the first light. God does not shine in the world, he shines in himself. The ground of the soul, a place void of all images, is the true darkness. This is where his light shines. Symbol 6. When the soul is unified and there enters into total self-abnegation, then she finds God as in nothing. Fortunately, the Socrates quote included in my interpretation of symbol 2 can be used as a cipher for this symbol. The body that Socrates speaks of is more than just the physical body, it also represents the myriad of concerns endemic to creaturely life and our identity as beings in the world. The body, i.e., creaturely life, according to Socrates, is the impurity that keeps humanity from attaining a pure soul. Self-abnegation must mean a withdrawal from creaturely life. We know that this is what Eckhart must mean because withdrawing from the creaturely life, i.e., entering the ground of the soul, is what Eckhart calls for in giving birth to God within. The ground of the soul is nothing, but that's where God is. A curious aspect of this symbol is the notion of the unified soul. Eckhart has said on previous occasions that there are two parts of the soul. Quote, "The masters say the soul has two faces, her upper face gazes at God all the time, and the lower face looks down somewhat and guides the senses. The upper face, which is the apex of the soul, is in eternity and has nothing to do with time, it knows nothing of time or of the body." End quote. When the soul is consumed with the cares of the body, i.e., creaturely life, she is unwhole. The unification of the soul, which is apparently achieved by self-abnegation, which we have established means a withdrawal from creaturely life, means closing the eyes of the lower face. A quote from the Corpus Hermeticum. "For body's sleep became the soul's awakening, and closing of the eyes, true vision, pregnant with good my silence, and the utterance of my word, logos, begetting of good things." End quote. Symbol 7. Whatever my soul perceives from without, an alien element enters in. The language Eckhart uses makes it sound like we are possessed by demons whenever we observe the world. My understanding is that Eckhart is speaking here about false impressions. We look at the world of creatures, which are nothing in themselves, and believe all that we see to be something because they charm our senses. Eckhart sees all of creation as a world of shadows, in the Platonic sense. What we grasp with our senses, the powers of the soul, is merely a projection, a shadow, resulting from our turning away from the light. Eckhart believes we should turn away from the world of shadows, expel all these alien elements, i.e., things that are not light, and come into the light we essentially are. Symbol 8. If we do see God in this light, it must be quite private and indrawn, without the intrusion of anything created. Then we have an immediate knowledge of eternal life. The first sentence of this symbol is a simple expression of Eckhart's doctrine concerning the ground of the soul, which includes the process by which we arrive in the light of God to be found there. If one has understood the meaning of the symbols treated thus far, this part of the symbol should be trivial. In fact, if you have understood one of these symbols, you should understand them all. They all point to one thing, God, i.e., the holy nothing. If we take symbol 1 seriously, then we are either in the light, which implies absolute understanding, or we are out of the light, which implies absolute ignorance. We understand nothing until we understand everything in unity with God. God is not a growing light, He is a flash of thunder. The second part of this symbol seems to be a confession of gnosis. Immediate knowledge of eternal life means that it is not speculative knowledge. Speculative knowledge does not require us to purify our soul so that we may give birth to God within us. Imagine asking a professor to do this. Clearly, this path to the immediate knowledge of eternal life demands something more of its aspirants. This is why we call Eckhart a mystic, not a theologian. He gained this knowledge through self-purification and the birth of God within him. For those that cannot bear this notion of God being born within man, remember that you are in darkness and the God you conceive of cannot possibly be Him. We must clear our minds of any preconceived notions of God if we are to enter His light. This is what Meister Eckhart teaches us. Symbol 9. The light that is God flows out and darkens every light. I'll venture to interpret this symbol by way of analogy. A husband and wife have been happily married for many years. From the outside it seems like an idyllic white picket fence family, but underneath the facade lurks a betrayal of the heart, infidelity. The wife has been cheating on the husband for years behind his back. What will happen to the marriage when the concealed infidelity comes to light? It will darken its light. And so it is with the light of God and our love affair with the world. A quote from Leonardo da Vinci. "The mole has very small eyes and always remains underground. It lives as long as it stays in concealment, and as soon as ever it comes to the light it instantly dies, because it becomes known. So it is with a lie." End quote. Symbol 10. In seeing nothing, he saw the divine nothing. If you've followed me so far, hopefully I've shown that these statements are symbols of one thing, the divine nothing, i.e., the uncreated essence of God. If I have not succeeded in doing so, you must have noticed that there is a lot of repetition. Eckhart is speaking about the same thing over and over again, but in different ways, under different symbols. Perhaps that isn't clear from what I've written here, but this is the impression his writings have left on me. This is not a flaw of his writings. On the contrary, his remarkable consistency proves he was drawing upon firm experience. Seeing nothing means closing the eyes of the lower half of the soul, as explained in my interpretation of symbol 6. It's another expression for purifying oneself of creatures, i.e., coming into the ground of the soul. What happens when we come into the ground of the soul? God is born within, i.e., we see the divine nothing. Why is God called the divine nothing? He is nothing because he is uncreated. He is not a cup, horse, dog, president, rock, alien, shoe, electron, theorem, perfume, sausage, integer, etc. If I extended this list to the set of all possible things, God would not be an element of it. God is nothing because he does not belong to the set of all created things. This fact does not impoverish God. He is not a thing, but he contains the essence of all things. Conclusion. I sought to show in this reading review that 10 statements selected from this week's Meister Eckhart sermon are symbols of the same object, nothing. Did I succeed? How could I? Nothing is everything. Everything is nothing. Given that I have happily failed, I hope that my interpretations have at least provided some food for thought to those who strive to understand this venerable saint and apply his teachings to their lives. If you are interested in Meister Eckhart, join us Saturdays at 12:30 to 2 p.m. EST as we embark on our 4th month of reading the complete mystical works of Meister Eckhart.